All right, so let's go over this real quick. So what's an activity as it relates to Android? This is a screen in your application. All right, so I mean, you could have written some other things like how we compared activities to UI view controllers on iOS and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, as it relates to Android, an activity is going to be a screen in your app. Yeah.
So like you can run in the background or something like that?
That would be a true statement, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's a screen in your app. They can run in the background, yeah. And then what's a view? Anything you can see. You could also say for activity, you can say it on either one of these. So, and this guy is contained inside an activity. And you could say an activity is a collection of views. It's probably a fair thing to say. But just saying a screen in your application is enough, and anything you can see is enough. Yeah, that shows me that you know where those two dudes live in the Android ecosystem. The tiny details that float in the middle are less important. Not unimportant, but for purpose of a quiz, less important. All right, questions about that? Okie dokie. Okay, so let's go back to Android here. So we had our Android starter application here at the end of last class. And I think, what did I do? I was updating Gradle, so I wasn't actually able to hit the play button right at the end of class. Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. Okay, so clearly it's finished updating it now. So by default, just to review this real quick, up here we have our app. So this creates all this stuff for us. So we haven't written one line of code yet all this stuff has been created for us. And inside the app folder, we have something called the Java folder. Inside the Java folder, this very top one is our actual package. And we see that we have this class in here called main activity. That's the Java class that was created for us. Okay, so this goes back to the idea of MVC. Okay, so in MVC, the view is going to be our layout file. So that's our interface. The controller is our code behind. So our main activity.java is an example of our controller. We don't really know the model piece yet. If you were in game programming this morning, we talked about the model piece. So you have a leg up on the competition, if you will. Although it is a bit concerning based on what we talked about in game programming this morning, how this was the last slide we had in this class. And you guys had deer in the headlights look when I was talking about data representation languages this morning. So maybe you're lucky I didn't ask this for the quiz. But we'll swing back to this shortly. Okay, so in any case, this guy right here represents our the logic behind the controller in the MVC model, as opposed to if you click on the so this is not inside Java, so we have another folder here called Res. These are resources. If you click on that, inside of there, the one we're interested in right now is the folder called Layout. And then we have our activity main.xml. Okay, so this guy is related to the actual layout or interface in the MVC world. Okay, what is XML? Let's say the quiz had asked you about XML. What is that guy?
It's a data representation language.
It is a data representation language, and it looks like this. For those of you who were in game programming this morning, we talked about it being a tag-based language. I think we mentioned it in here last time too. But we see how this kind of looks HTML-esque, something like that. So XML, HTML, these are both tag-based languages. XML was based on HTML. So we have an opening tag up here. We have a closing tag that has a little slash in front of it. And then we have stuff in between. Just like in HTML, we would have opening, closing tags. We have an opening title tag, a closing title tag, an opening body tag, closing body tag, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, when we're working with Android, we can come in here and we can edit stuff based on the text itself. So if I go to the design, you see we have hello world sitting here in the middle. I can come into the text here and I can just copy my text view and paste another one here and then go back to design. And I have two separate text views. They're actually sitting right on top of each other right now since it's inside of something called a constraint layout, but you notice we do have two text views. Okay. So anything that I write in XML here becomes true in the design here. Similarly, if I drag another text view out here somewhere, just put it up there, you'll see that in the text, I now have a third text view. Make sense? So we have a visual way of messing around with our interfaces. And for the historical context on that, just to give you a another. Hey, how many of you have seen the phrase WYSIWYG before?
Never even heard.
Never heard of WYSIWYG? Really?
Yeah.
What is it?
What you see is what you get.
What you see is what you get. What you see is what you get. All right. So WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. So over here, we would call this the WYSIWYG interface for Android, where you can just drag crap onto the screen, and behind the scenes, it does the magic coding aspect of it for you. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I mean, first of all, for those of you, well, maybe only one or two of you have done Android before, but if you have been doing Android for a very, very long time, it's come a really long way. Okay. This interface designer in Android used to basically be useless. If you compare this to iOS development, iOS has something called Interface Builder with their Xcode product. It's always been pretty good. You can drag and drop stuff. And in fact, when you do iOS development, it's not that it's impossible, but they definitely do not make it convenient for you just to hit a tab and go and edit the XML code directly. So with iPhone, you're dragging and dropping buttons, you're placing them where you want. All that's happening completely graphically designed, you know, through a WYSIWYG type thing. Yeah.
What folder is the layout?
Res. So if you have your app folder, top level app folder, and then inside of that, you have a folder called Res. Inside of that, you have a folder called Layout.
But I don't have a folder called
Then you did something wrong. You don't have a folder called Res? Do you have an app?
Yeah.
Okay. What's inside your app folder?
Libs and SRC.
Libs and SRC. Yeah, something didn't go right when you created your project. I would say go back and create a new project. Click new project here. Application name, you can leave all the other stuff the same. Hit next, choose phone and tablet. Hit next, empty activity. And then make sure you have this generate layout file clicked. That might have been the piece that was missing, but the fact that you didn't even have a Java folder says something went wrong. And then click finish and it should create a structure like this. All right, so for iOS development, you've always had something that kind of looks like this where you can drop buttons in and stuff like that and get them laid out pretty well. There's still a skill related to that to kind of get it to look right, but you can get it to look right-ish pretty quickly. For a long, long time, Android, well, before Android Studio, it was Eclipse with an Android plugin to give you this kind of experience. So actually, Android Studio is based on top of Eclipse, because they just made it a single product. But this interface builder thing was not very good. Why do you think that Apple's interface builder was so polished, whereas Google's interface builder was basically unusable. Do you think the argument is, does it mean that Google's terrible?
Is it like the whole like there are different problems they're solving because Android's running on more apps and more phones? Like there's way different like in terms of hardware, so it's easier to like design something for that.
Yeah. So the way I like to put it sometimes is, I'll just put it on a slide. So we're going to call this Apple versus Google, or let's call it iOS versus Android. So with iOS, Apple is solving the old Apple problem. Kind of funny. I'll say what that means in a second. Android, Google is solving the old Microsoft problem. What does that mean for iOS? It means Apple is writing a development tool for software that they created, which runs on hardware that they created. So we're going to call that the old Apple proprietary problem, right? Apple controls the software, Apple controls the hardware, they control all the pieces. So because it's a very controlled environment, it's no wonder that things generally just work because they control all the sides of the coin. Whereas Android is solving the old Microsoft problem. That is to say that so Google is writing, well, actually, it's not even Google. So Google is writing a plugin for a development platform called Eclipse, which they did not write, to create software for an OS that they did write-ish. They did write-ish, which runs on a bunch of phones, most of which they did not make. So they're solving a much more complex problem. Make sense? All right, so it isn't necessarily surprising that the Android ecosystem for creating interfaces wasn't overly polished for a long time. I mean, I think it's still fair to say it's not as polished as iOS's interface builder, but at this point, it's, we're at least in the same conversation, where for a long time, it wasn't even close. In fact, for a really long time, you were almost wasting your time doing dragging and dropping type stuff here. You were almost just better off going into the text thing and just developing your interface through this, copying and pasting and changing things. It was just quicker and more reliable to just create the XML yourself rather than drag and drop. Okay. And even though, so this seems a little bit, tedious, but once we drop one text view in there, we have our basic for it. We can just copy it and then, change just a few things, right? All these things look, if I want to change the text that's on one of these, I can just change the text right here to say something different, so on and so forth. That makes sense? So these are all things that you are, capable of doing, and your life would have been easier just to do it in XML. Which then makes the interface design a little bit more tedious, a little bit longer, but still doable. Not the end of the world. But Android's come a long way, so now we're in a situation where it's not too bad. Okay, so now let's start off by creating a little app. I'm gonna start off by just deleting these two extra things I just created to get us back to our starting point. So I have my single text view that's in there. All right, so this is effectively, I haven't touched anything. I created a brand new project. It created my controller, so my Java code, that's the code behind for this thing. We don't know how that works yet, but it created for me. I didn't have to do anything. It created my default interface, which gives me my little starting point hello world. which is pretty consistent with what we've learned before, where your first program you write in any language is the hello world program, right? So except this one, it made it for you. All you had to do is hit next 3 times and hit finish, and now you have a hello world Android application. All right, so when you're ready to go, you'll hit the play button here, and what it'll do is it'll open up this thing called select your deployment target. Now, if you have an Android phone, you can put your phone into developer mode and then actually plug it in through USB, and then your phone will show up right here under connected devices, and you can actually run your app directly on your Android phone. Okay. Otherwise, I've already created a virtual device here, but I'm going to take you through the process of doing it. So let's say you have nothing sitting here. You'll click on Create New Virtual Device. So this is like you creating a software version of an Android phone. So Create New Virtual Device. Then you go in here, and you can pick whatever you want here. I would go under Phone, and I would pick maybe a Pixel, or I have Nexus 5 because the last time I had used this. So actually, I'll just go through it. I'm going to create a Pixel. So I'll create the Google Pixel. So this is, a couple of years ago phone. The reason I'm picking a little bit older phone than the current one is it'll be running a little bit older version of the software, and it'll run a little quicker in your machine. Yeah.
How did you get to that?
I started off by getting to it by just hitting the play button. Another way you can get to it is going to Tools and then AVD Manager.
I don't know that either.
I don't have that either. Are you in Android Studio, or are you in Eclipse?
I'm in Android Studio. My design editor is unavailable until after a successful project.
Okay, so you probably, if you go up to Help and you click Check for Updates, you probably have a bunch of stuff that shows up.
I have the latest version of Android Studio.
So you get this exact same thing as pops up here?
Yeah.
And your sync is not working. Try closing it and then reopening it and see if that makes a difference. Because we have this thing called Gradle that launches when it first starts. And sometimes Gradle can get a little buggy, and sometimes closing it and reopening it can help. Or you can reboot or reinstall the thing, and that'll reinstall Gradle. All right, so in any case, I'm going to just hit the play button. That just gets me into the right thing. It's going to ask me, where do I want to play my, what device do I want to create my application for? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say create a new virtual device. I would go ahead and choose Pixel. This is kind of like a starter device. Hit next. All right, then it's asking you what version of the OS do you want to run on this thing? Actually, do I not have it on this guy? Let me just run something here real quick. Because this was an old device I created a long time ago, which already has the version of the software. Okay, this is running Oreo. So I'll just let that bake for a second. And I'll go into my Tools, AVD Manager. I'll pretend like I'm creating a new device here. I'll click on Pixel, then hit Next. Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's showing you this recommended thing here. I went to x86 images, and I have previously downloaded Oreo. So if you don't have anything downloaded, it would be in your best interest, since I'm creating projects on here using Oreo, for you to choose the x86 image Oreo. So that's API 26, Android 8.0, this exact one. Okay, API 26 for x86 normal, not 64. So click download, and that's the one you would choose. That's a pretty big download, so you'd want to get that just cooking overnight or something like that. Okay, but in any case, it'll be in your best interest to pick that exact same one, so that when I put a project up on GitHub that you can then check out, it'll run on your device and not say this was created under a different API level. Do you want to update it? Blah, blah, blah. This will make your life the smoothest. if you choose exactly API level 26 for x86, not x86 64. Make sense? All right. So everybody got that? What I just said? All right. All right. So then you would click next and just leave all this stuff default. You know, it basically is creating a Pixel phone for you in software, and it has all the stuff by default set up, and just hit finish. And when you do that, you will have something that looks like this. All right, which is what I clicked on when I hit play. So there is my Hello World application running. All right, so when I hit play here, it's showing me the connected devices because I've already launched it. If it wasn't launched, I'll go ahead and close this again just so you see the whole process. So I'll close that. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now. So here's my available virtual device that I just created. Okay, I don't have any currently connected devices, either a running virtual device or an actual connected Android phone. One thing you will notice on your laptops, if you have a slower machine, that the emulator does take some time to launch. So you might want to keep it open between classes and stuff like that, because sometimes it could take like 3 or 4 minutes to launch on some slower hardware. But if you do have an Android phone, generally speaking, you'll have a much better experience getting it to run on your Android phone. But what you would do is, so for example, who has an Android phone in here? All right, what Android phone do you have?
S8.
S8, okay. So we're gonna go in here. I'm just gonna do a Galaxy S8 developer mode. All right, because most of these phones, there's like a little hack to get it to go in developer mode. That way, normal users don't accidentally turn their phone into developer mode. Okay, so notice here, so just do a search for whatever your phone is. Click developer mode. So it's saying first you'll have to enable the hidden developer options on your phone. So you go into, you head to the About Phone menu in Settings. All right. And then you'll find wherever the build number is in there. And you're going to tap it 7 times. That actually seems to be a pretty consistent way of doing it. That might work on multiple phones. So you go into Settings, About, go to the build number, and it looks like it's just text. Tap that 7 times. And then something happened. Then when you hit back and go into Settings, you'll now see a developer mode option. And you go in there and just turn on USB debugging. All right, so once you are, once you have that, you turn on USB debugging. And from that point forward, if you plug your device into your phone or plug your device into your laptop, it'll show up right here. Make sense? So if you have an Android phone and you want to be able to run your apps that you created here on your actual phone, you need to, and you only need to do that once. You enable developer mode and enable USB debugging. This won't break your device or anything. Okay, it just makes your device readable by a computer for log files and stuff like that. Things more than just music. All right, go ahead.
Just curious, how would you get out of developer mode?
I mean, once you've enabled it, now you have a menu in your settings. You just turn off USB debugging, and that's done. I don't know if you might be able to go in and tap on the build number 7 times again to make it disappear. I'm not sure. But if you've disabled USB debugging, it's not. You have the option to turn it on, but it's not on. But it won't. It's not going to impact you at all if you leave it on. It doesn't hurt anything. All right, so that makes sense. If you do have an Android phone, you might find it fun to kind of get apps running on your actual phone, and I think you'll notice it runs a little faster that way, especially on older hardware. So don't necessarily take the speed that things launch on here as what will be par for the course. This is a pretty powerful machine. So my emulator launches in like 5 seconds or 10 seconds or something like that. That will very likely not be most of your experiences. Okay, it might take, it used to take a really, really long time. It used to be like 5 or 10 minutes for the emulator to launch. Now there's a tool in there called HAXM, HAXM, that automatically installs on it for Intel processors. And what that guy does is he actually uses your Intel processor to pretend to be an ARM processor, which is what Android phones run on. Mm-hmm. So it actually will allow your fake Android device to run directly on your physical hardware, which makes it run much more quickly. All right, makes sense? But slower machines are still going to be a little bit hiccupy with that. So if you notice your virtual device is loading real slow, if you do have access to an Android device, you'll find life a little bit easier. Otherwise, once it loads, don't close it. Just minimize it, leave it in the background, and now you're just good to go for forever and ever. All right. So when you first launch it, if you don't have any devices loaded, go ahead and choose an available virtual device. I'm going to choose my Pixel API 26 that I just created. I'll hit OK. It's going to launch that program, which is my Android device here. And there's my application running on there. Hello World. Well, actually, now it's running on there. Hello World. The other one was just because that's what used to be on there. Okay. So now we have a working application. If I go and I change the text on this guy, so if I come into my design thing here and I click on my text view, and over here on the far right, it says attributes. Now, if you don't see this attributes thing here, it might look like that currently. Just click attributes and that'll expand it. So you have this little thing. If you need to make your screen a little bit bigger for design, you can do that and get stuff squeezed around. But when you click attributes, I'm going to go ahead and change the text here to LOL. So now it says LOL. And then I'll hit play. Now it's showing me I have a connected device. Do I want to use this one? Yes. I'm going to go ahead and hit this button here that says use same selection for future launches. That way, every single time I hit play, I don't have to go through this middleman screen. And that will go ahead and launch my app. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the actual app doesn't pop up from the background once you've launched it the first time. So now if I want to see that, I actually have to switch over to the emulator. Okay, so it's not that it's not working. It's just that it's not in the foreground. All right, so there's my LOL. Make sense? All right. So now the idea is we have a running Hello World app. Well, now we have a running LOL app. All right, so then the next thing I'm going to teach you is I'm going to teach you a very simplified way of building interfaces. And this has less to do with how interfaces are built today and more to do with I don't want to spend time, more to do with two things. I don't want to spend time teaching you about really intricate interfaces. Because we're focused on the development side of things. Secondly, it's also not my skill set. So, I mean, I can build a reasonable interface or something like that. But if you want to take some time and really learn the design stuff of constraint layouts and this kind of stuff, you can. I'm going to basically show you a pretty cookie cutter way of building reasonable looking interfaces that allow us to accomplish what we want to accomplish. So my approach will probably work for most business applications. If you want to start getting into really, beautifully designed type stuff that runs, that looks the same on every single device, that different size screens and stuff like that, you might want to start getting into some of these constraint layouts, which is the default now. Okay, but I'm going to show you my starting point go-to move. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to just delete that text view that it gave me. So that's basically a label. A text view is a label. So let's add that to our notes here. Did we do that last time? All right, so we're going to start talking about different kinds of views. So we have something called a text view. This is a label that shows text on the screen. That's what a text view is. Okay, nothing more. Shows text. All right. So now the very first thing I do when I have my constraint layout is you could actually, if you wanted to, get to the point where you can get rid of the constraint layout, but that's more trouble than it's worth because it's a little bit buggy when you do that, because then you have to go in here to the text, you add a new layout in here, then you have to delete this old one, and then you mess up one of the lines. So I don't even mess with that. What I do is in the design, the very first thing I do is up here on my palette, which if that's hidden from you, it might look like this. Just click on palette. So you notice you have the same icon, this little I don't even know what that looks like. Is that just a line with an arrow that says I want to put like dock this? So if you don't see the thing expanded, click on palette. That'll show you this thing. These are like the widgets that you can drop into your interface. Go into layouts. Okay, so layouts is our tool for organizing stuff on the screen. So if we want to throw that in the notes, I'll actually put this in a separate slide because they are technically views. Actually, a layout here. So a layout is a tool for organizing things on the screen. And programmatic, let's just leave it like that. I don't know. 2 M's. Programmatically, they are represented as a view group, which is a collection of views. All right. So it's technically not something you directly see, but indirectly it's something you see. All right. And you'll see this as an example later. So I'm just more giving you the thing in your notes that we can refer back to then. So this isn't something I'm going to like quiz you on next class or something. This is just more of a connecting some dots. All right. So a layout is our means of getting stuff laid on the screen the way we want it to lay out on the screen. So the very first thing I always do is I just leave my constraint layout there. I go to my palette, I click on layouts, and our kind of our go-to move, our bread and butter for creating our boring but functional interfaces is going to be these linear layouts. We have 2 of them. We have vertical linear layouts and we have horizontal linear layouts. Vertical linear layouts, it creates a layout, and anything you throw in there, it stacks on top of each other vertically. Horizontal linear layouts creates a layout, and anything you throw in there, it stacks next to each other horizontally. All right. So the very first thing I always do is I throw a vertical linear layout into my constraint layout. All right. So now, and if you look at this thing, if I click on the linear layout here and I look at attributes, you see how it says layout width is match parent, layout height is match parent. What this will do is it doesn't matter what device you're on, you go suck all the way to the edges of the screen. Okay. So now you have something that will be the size of the device that you're working with. And now as you drop stuff in here, you'll just lay it out the way you want to have it laid out. All right. So I always start with a vertical linear layout, and then I can start dropping stuff in there. So for example, if I go to my text and I click text views and I start dropping text views in here, notice it just stacks them on top of each other. Make sense? So it's not, laying it out, constraining it to one of the corners or something like that. It just lays it out. Similarly, if I click on layouts and I go to my horizontal linear layout and I drop that guy in here, now I have a horizontal layout beneath. So see these guys over here? So it shows my linear layout. If I click on my linear layout, notice that this guy's orientation is vertical. If I change this from vertical to horizontal, it'll relay those guys out. Okay, they're off the screen now because of my last dude, the linear layout I put in there. Why aren't they showing up? This horizontal linear layout is set to match the parent, so it's squeezing everything out to the sides. Let me just delete that one real quick. I need to force it to relay out. All right, yeah, so same issue as I had a second ago.
Combine different layouts together.
I'm going to do that, yep. I'm just trying to get the thing to show back up here. So this is still some of that a little bit buggy stuff you run into. I'm going to select, so if you look at these text views, this whole layout width, layout height for something, this has to do with how it will force itself to lay out underneath the container it's in. So this text view is inside of a linear layout container. And notice its width is set to match parent. which means that my horizontal linear layout is this wide. So that very first text view is pushing everything else off the screen because its width is the width of that layout. If I change all of these guys, I can select all of them at once. I can set their width, instead of match parent, I can set it to wrap content. This will make them the exact width of the text that's in there. Similarly, if I set it to none, now they have no width. All right. So if I say wrap content, now it'll be the size of whatever's in that screen. Okay. So I'm just going to go back and delete this real quick because I just was showing you how actually a linear layout is a linear layout, and you can choose whether it's a vertical or horizontal orientation. But they give you both options in here, even though these are the exact same widgets. It just happens to be that the orientation is set for vertical when you drag the vertical one in, and the orientation would be set as horizontal when you drag the horizontal one in. Okay, so usually what I would do is I would start with a vertical linear layout here, and then I would build my interface based on that. Okay, so maybe I want to have kind of a title, the top of my screen or something like that. So I'll go ahead and I'll drop a text view in here. So it'll put that guy at the top. And then maybe I want to have the text for this guy say, my first app, something like that. All right, but right now it's really small text. Okay, so what they're showing you over up here is they're showing you kind of the go-to stuff that you might mess with in your application. So there's this thing, text appearance. I'm going to hit the drop down on that, and you can choose the font. I'm going to bump the size way up, so we're going to make this size 30. Okay, so now we can see that a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to make it bold. I'm going to make it italic, whatever, just fancy it up a little bit. Click better. Oh, maybe this font. Oh, yeah, we go. So there's bold. All right. Now, there is a way to lay it out so that it's centered or something like that, but I'm actually going to show you the more generic way that will make this work for any kind of view. So inside of Android, kind of the Android layout mechanism, okay, so we have these things called attributes. So attributes are variables associated with a view. I'm going to say or view group, which actually is a view. All right. So just to be generic here, let me just say associate with a view, since in our mind we're thinking views are anything we see. Okay. So variables, attributes are variables associated with a view. Now, one of our go-to attributes is an attribute called gravity. All right. So now the way the gravity attribute works is going back into here. What I want you to do is I want you to think about, and this is almost like scoping rules for variables. Okay. But for us, since we're designing an interface, why don't we think about it as like, three-dimensional space. All right. So let's just say that this linear layout is this room right here. Right. So let's just say it's representative of S120. We can set the gravity for this room, for this container. A linear layout is a container which holds other views. So I can set the gravity for this room, and anything that's in this room would be affected by the gravity of this room, right? So right now, what is gravity doing? It's pushing us down to the bottom.
You're talking about Earth gravity?
Gravity, yeah, Earth gravity, whatever. Yeah, I mean, gravity means gravity in this particular case, or our current understanding of gravity. So if we're in this room, we're in this container, the gravity in this room is gravity that's pushing us down to the bottom of the room, right? If we had gravity, it was pushing us to the top. For some reason, we'd be up on the ceiling. It was pushing us to the left, we'd be over here. From my perspective, if it was pushing us to the right, we'd be over here. If it was centered, we all suck to the middle of the room. Make sense? So we can set the gravity for a container, and then anything that's inside that container will be impacted by that gravity. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my linear layout here that has, well, actually, I'm not going to do the linear layout. Instead, I'm going to take this view here and my text view. Now my text view actually contains some text. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this text view to have gravity set to center. So any text that's in there will get sucked to the center of that text view. All right. This won't affect other things that are inside this linear layout. So let me just show you that. I'm going to go ahead and just drop a second text view in here. All right. We see that guy's left justified now. They're both left justified. I'll click on just the first one here. Now, right now, we don't see an attribute for gravity in here. All right, so the initial view for attributes kind of shows us like the most commonly used attributes for a particular widget, particular view. But if down here at the bottom it says view all attributes, I'm going to click on that. I'm going to click on that better. There we go. And then we're going to scroll down. You see we have a whole bunch of stuff in here now, right? So I'm going to scroll down to the G's. So here's gravity. And there's several that we have: top, bottom, left, right, center vertically, fill vertically. So that'll actually suck it, like stretch it out. Center horizontally. Center will be horizontally and vertically. Fill will fill it horizontally and vertically. Clip vertical. I'm not sure the exact behavior that'll get. It'll probably be if it's too big, it'll cut it off so it doesn't leak into other views on your screen. This has more to do with like as you're designing your interfaces, making them look correct. So this is going a little bit beyond, you know, this is more trial and error stuff until you get an expertise in it, and then you can worry about it. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to say I want to center this guy horizontally. So I set the gravity for this first text views container to be centered horizontally. So everything's sucked to the center of it horizontally. Now, in our case here, centered horizontally or center would have done the same thing, because center centers it horizontally and vertically. Okay, but right now this guy vertically is just the exact same width as the exact same height as the content, right? But if I stretch this guy out, okay, so if I make that guy taller like that, and then I click on this again, and I go down to gravity. Where's my gravity? Oh, I probably moved it to the top since I used it. I'm going to actually go ahead and hit this little star next to gravity. I think that'll make it show up on the main screen of all the things, kind of like as a favorite. But I'll go to gravity. So what I'll do now is I will center it vertically. See how it got sucked to the middle there? Similarly, I can remove those things and I can just say center it. That'll center it horizontally and vertically. That makes sense? Okay, now notice when I drug that thing down, this particular text view, when you go up to its layout width and layout height, its layout width is to match parent. So this will suck it out to the edges of whatever container he lives within. And he lives inside of this vertical linear layout here, whose width is match parent. All right, so that is the full size of your screen. But because I changed it, his height is now set to 206 pixels. I can modify that and set it to, well, let me cancel this. Let me click, there we go. I can modify that and say I want it to wrap the content. So whatever content we actually put inside that text view, I want its height to just wrap it. Now it's shorter, because I only had one line of text in there. That makes sense? So that whole layout width, layout height, that allows us to have views take up different amounts of space and that kind of stuff. And then I took this single view and I set his gravity to be center. So the text that's in there became centered. All right. Yet it did not impact this other text view, because this other text view is not inside of this container. It's not inside this view. In fact, text views don't let us have other views inside them. Whereas linear layouts, these are called view groups, they do. So a view group actually is a view, but it's a view that enables us to have multiple views inside of it. Don't worry about that too much this exact moment, but That's kind of the difference.
Copy and paste.
You can. So I can copy this guy. So I just highlight it, hit Control C, and then I can go ahead and paste it. And there gives me another one with all the same attributes. Go ahead.
What is the right screen showing?
This guy here, that's showing the kind of the layout model for it without the extra stuff. So it's showing me my linear layout where it goes on the screen here. So I think it's almost like X-ray, I guess is maybe the better way of putting it. There is a way to turn that off because it really isn't. I never use it, so it's really not very valuable. So I think that's the show constraints. Is that the one? No. Show margins? Nope. Yeah, one of these things does turn that off. Oh yeah, it's the design and blueprint. If I just turn on design, it'll just show the one thing. All right, so I'll go ahead and delete these other two text views. All right, so now I have my single text view there. Now, if I keep dropping stuff into this linear layout, it'll just keep stacking them on top of each other. But let's just say in my interface here, I want to have like 3 buttons. We won't make the buttons do anything yet, but let's just say I want to have 3 buttons in there. And I want to have them right next to each other. So what I'll do is I'll go into my layouts. I'll throw a horizontal linear layout underneath. So I'm throwing it into my vertical linear layout, which will put it underneath my first app. So notice it's here now. So here's the container that houses my all the stuff in there. Now, if I go to my vertical linear layout and I go to his gravity, and I set his gravity to center vertically, for example, shouldn't that have sucked everything down? Oh, it does because this guy is taking up the whole screen. So I need to set his layout. Height to wrap content, I believe. There we go. So when I had that second linear layout, it was taking up all the space in the parent. So even though the parent's gravity was set to center vertically, this other guy was super tall. So everything else was pushing down, but you're pushing down on top of something that's doesn't push down. That makes sense? If I'm standing on one of these tables and we have gravity pushing down, I won't actually hit, well, I might hit the floor. It depends what the weight limit of the tables are. But in general, assuming these tables are strong enough, I'm standing on a table, even though gravity is pushing me to the floor, I won't make it to the floor because the table's holding me up. That's what was happening with this linear layout here. Okay, so by setting the gravity in this room, my vertical linear layout, to center vertically, everything inside of it would get sucked to the center of it from a vertical perspective. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just turn the gravity off. We'll just leave it as the default. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting, no, actually, let me show you another example of this whole wrap content thing. I'm going to set it back to match parent. So that'll make that linear layout take up the whole screen as much as the space it can take. Now, this is a horizontal linear layout. So anything I put inside of here, it'll put next to each other. So I'm going to go to my buttons palette, just grab a normal button. I'm going to drag this guy into my horizontal linear layout here. So there's one button. Notice it took up the entire screen. There's my next button. Notice it put it next to the guy. There's my next button. Organize them next to the guy, and they're each taking up a third of the space. You know, just they're filling the parent as much as the parent will let them fill. The width is the wrap content for the button, but they're also, even if I shorten the word in there, its width is still a fixed width relative to this is something called layout weight. Don't worry about that too much right now.
And if you have like a longer word, you would like.
It'll actually, if I just have a whole bunch of stuff in there, it'll push it because now I'm beyond the default.
How did you word the second?
Huh?
The second view. Yes.
Which second view? This guy?
The other screen you have. The X-ray one.
The who? What?
The X-ray one.
Oh, that was this guy right here. The default is design plus blueprint. So I just changed it to just design. All right, so now I have my 3 buttons in here. So now let's say that I wanted to actually put a text view below these buttons for whatever reason. All right, so I'm going to take my text view, instead of dropping it in here, which will put it into not the place I want it to go in. I'm going to take my text view, I'm going to drag it down here to my actual component tree, and I'm going to lay it out. So see where that blue arrow is changing positions? I want it to live within this vertical linear layout, okay, but at the bottom. So I can initially drop it in the vertical linear layout there, and notice it put it at the very top. If I want, then I can just drop it down to the bottom, and now so it's under my vertical linear layout, but it's not a child of my horizontal linear layout. If I drug it into my horizontal linear layout, it would put it next to those buttons. But now it's a child of my vertical linear layout, but notice we don't see it, right? It's pushed off the screen. Why? Because this horizontal linear layout has a height set to match the parent. So anything that's below it gets shoved off the bottom of the screen because this guy's super tall. If I change his height to instead wrap content, now my text shows back up. That makes sense? All right, so this is kind of our go-to moves for working with our layouts. Makes some reasonable sense. So we can build all sorts of apps this way by just putting vertical and horizontal linear layouts inside of each other to get things to stack the right way and all sorts of stuff like that. You're not making really, really, really interesting interfaces, but you're making functional interfaces that'll be good enough for us. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just for the sake of, well, I'll leave this other stuff in here for right now just so we have them to play with later on. But I'm actually going to focus on just one piece here. I want to focus on this particular text view. All right, so I'm going to select it. Now over here in attributes at the very top, we have something called ID. Now this is the kind of unique name for this particular view. I am going to want to access this view from my code. So I can leave the name alone here where it says text view 5, but that's not a very descriptive thing, is it? So I'm going to go ahead and give this guy a more descriptive unique identifier. So I'm going to call this guy app name TV for text view. That's more of a naming convention that I use. So if something is a text view, I call it TV. If it's an edit text, I call it ET, so on and so forth. Okay, so this guy is going to be called app name TV. So now I have a better way of referencing him. I'll remember that, oh, if I want to set the app name text view for this guy, I can programmatically gain access to this guy. All right, so what we're about to look at here is how MVC works again. Remind me about MVC. What's the idea of MVC? What does MVC stand for?
Multi-view controller.
Model view controller. And what is model view controller? What does it say? What's the idea for MVC?
Separate interface from our logic.
Okay, so it's a good idea to have your interface in one place, your logic in another place, and also your model, which is your data, in another place. We haven't talked about that piece of it. But so from our perspective, we have our controller, which is the Java file, and we have our interface, which is the XML file. And these are in 2 separate places, but sometimes we need those guys to talk. Make sense? All right, so we need to see now MVC is an idea. Okay, it's something called a design pattern. It's an idea. It does not dictate a specific implementation. So what we want to see here is how does Android actually accomplish MVC the way they do it. Okay, so what I want to do is when my app launches, I want this text view here to no longer say my first app. Maybe I want it to say Woot instead. Okay, which means that I need to be able to gain access to that widget, to that text view from within my controller. So this guy currently lives in my interface. I need to somehow access him from my controller. That make sense? So I'm going to go over to my controller code here. This is my main activity.java. And I'm going to go ahead and give myself a variable. So we have this function here called onCreate. I'm going to go ahead and add this to the notes. I'm going to create something here called an activity lifecycle. And one of these guys is called onCreate. So this is the function that automatically gets called one time when an activity first launches. Technically, it's when it's first created. It isn't actually on the screen yet, so launches might indicate it's on the screen. So this is when, it's born. It's been loaded into memory somewhere, and it's kind of preparing to show up onto the screen. All right, I'm going to put one more caveat on here. I'm going to say this is our first opportunity to manipulate the interface of an activity. That is, this happens before it is rendered on the screen. Okay, we have other points of activity lifecycle that we will look at, but right now this is all we care about. This is kind of our initialization, our constructor, if you will, for our activity. So when an activity is created, this function called onCreate automatically gets called. And remember, we didn't write this function. This was just provided for us by the Android magic. All right. But what I'm going to do in here is part of my application launching, as part of this activity being created, I want to go ahead and give myself programmatic access to that text view. So I'm going to create a variable capable of holding a text view. So I started typing in text view, and then I pressed enter. And what it did is up here under my imports, it imported android.widget.textView for me. Okay, otherwise, it hasn't heard of text views. All right, so I'm going to create a text view. I'm going to call it, what did I name the guy out there? I just want to have the names match. I called it app name TV. Yeah. They don't have to match, but I named them out here for a reason, so I might as well name them the same thing on the inside for the same reason. So this is called app name TV. That's going to be the name of my text view variable. Okay, this is just a normal plain Jane variable. He just, instead of being able to hold an int or a char or a string, he holds text views. Okay, that's what he holds. So I'm going to have a text view called app name TV, and this guy is going to be equal to, I'm going to actually write it a different way here. So I'm going to start off by saying, I'm going to say he's going to be equal to this dot. What is this? What's the this keyword reference? Any variable will resolve to its most local definition, but specifically, what does the this keyword refer to? If I asked you on a quiz, or like I asked you on a recent exam, what is the this keyword, and why do we need it? What would you say? Go ahead.
It's like self when we were using Python, so it'll refer to the variable of that class that's named.
Okay. Yep. It's how an object refers to itself from within itself. Right. So when I say this dot here, I'm referring to this particular instance of main activity. Okay, which is an activity. So I'm going to say this dot, and then we have a function in here called find view by ID. All right, this dot find view by ID. And then I'm going to say r dot ID dot app name TV. Okay, now for most of you, this is the first time you've ever seen this, right? But now I'm going to ask you some questions about it. And you should be able to answer these questions about it because you have mastered the difference between class methods and instance methods, and class fields and instance fields, right? This is obviously an instance, correct? Mm-hmm. What kind of animal is find view by ID here? Well, we have three options, right, for classes, for three options for any sort of object. It could be a field, it could be a method, it can be a constructor. Which of those three is that guy? Find view by ID is what kind of thing? A field, a method, or a constructor?
What is a field again?
Field is a variable name associated with a class.
Constructor, I think.
Okay, not a constructor.
It's method.
It's method. How do you know it's a method?
This wasn't the other two.
Because how do you know? How do you know it wasn't a field? We'll start with that. Well, so how did you know it wasn't the other two?
You said no.
No, I was answering what the field was thing for her. I never actually said it wasn't a field. You're right, it's a method. Now we got to come up with why it's a method. And we've had this exact discussion before.
It's doing something?
No, just looking at it, just glancing at the symbols that are there, the characters that are there. How do we know that guy's a method? Go ahead. It's got a parenthesis, right? Methods have a parameter list. So we got a name followed by a parameter list. If we just had a name, it's a field. Okay, if we have a name followed by a parameter list, now we have potentially, we know it's not a field then, but we have either a constructor or a method. What do constructors look like? Two characteristics of constructors that should that might be important to us. Right off the bat, we know this guy's not a constructor because we don't see the presence of what keyword? New. Constructors are always called with a new keyword in Java and C#. Okay. In actuality, in Python doesn't use the new keyword. It's not in Python. Swift has removed the new keyword because it's just an extra thing you type. Why don't we just call it a constructor? Okay. But what's the other thing about constructors? They always have the same name as what?
I guess class or object.
The class itself, yeah. So we would expect this guy to say like activity or something like that. Okay, so we know it's not a field because we have parentheses. We know it's not a constructor because it doesn't seem to match the name of the thing, and we don't see the new keyword present here. Therefore, it must be a method. Is this a class method or an instance method? Instant. You should be able to answer this instantly. It's an instance method. Why is it an instance method? Are we seeing this method being defined right now, or are we seeing this method being used? We're seeing it being used. And how do we identify an instance method when it's being used? How are instance methods called? They're called by an instance. And what's this? You told me this is how an instance refers to itself from within itself. So this is the instance of this class, and we're using that guy to call this method. You told me he's a method because of the parenthesis thing here and then the lack of the new keyword. So he must be a method. So we're calling this method using this variable, and that variable is an instance, so therefore this must be an instance method. Make sense? Even though you've never seen this before, and nothing we just talked about has anything to do with what find view by ID actually does. It's all just a matter of being able to read documentation and reading code. You understand the power of that skill? Okay. We still don't know what this guy does. We could make a guess maybe based on his name. But what we just went through has nothing to do with what this guy actually is accomplishing in our code. All we've done is we've just determined what kind of thing it is. What kind of animal are we dealing with? All right, so we're going to try this again. Let's look at the inside thing here. What is app name TV? Actually, forget about app name TV for a second. Let's just look at ID. Pretend like app name TV doesn't even exist. What's ID?
Identification.
What's ID as it relates to objects? It's one of three things, right? What are the three things it could possibly be?
Field, method, constructor.
Field, method, constructor. It's one of those three. Which of those three is it?
Field.
Field. How do you know it's a field? No parentheses. That guy's a field. Okay. Definitely a field. Okay. Is it a class field or an instance field? At this point, I am asking you to speculate, but you have some pretty good evidence here to speculate.
Instance.
You think it's an instance field? Okay. Tell me why you're wrong.
Class.
It's like just like a great way to start it off. It's like it's an instance field. Well, tell me why you're wrong.
Because I don't know what R is.
Okay, we're calling it with R. So it's an instance field if what's true?
If R is an instance of a class.
Okay, it is an instance field if R was an instance of a class. Okay, that is a true statement. It's a true statement. Now, I'm telling you that R is actually the name of a class. Why might a reasonable person speculate that R is the name of a class? It's capitalized. Yep. That's not, there's no steadfast rule that has to be the case. You can create an instance of a class with a capital letter. That's completely legal. You could also create the name of a class with a lowercase letter. But if you stand by kind of consistent naming conventions, typically speaking, classes start with an uppercase letter, variables start with a lowercase letter. That's the, and therefore a variable would hold the instance of a class, right? And so if you name your variables to start with lowercase letters, notice this here. We are creating a variable called save instance state. All right, so notice that the variable name starts with a lowercase letter. Yet it's an instance of a particular class named bundle, which happens to start with an uppercase letter. Okay, so this is not a Lippmann naming convention. This is programming naming conventions. That makes sense? Call it 99% of the time, if it starts with a capital letter, it's the name of a class. 99% of the time, if it starts with a lowercase letter, probably a variable. Okay, until you run into some jerk that flips the tables on you, and then things don't work out so well. All right, so when we look at this, we see uppercase letter, therefore we say that's probably the name of a class. If he's probably the name of the class, that's the dude we're using to call this ID thing. What's the ID thing? Well, it's a field. How do we know it's a field? Because we don't see parentheses. So now I'm calling this field with the name of a class, therefore that field must be a class field because we're calling it with the name of the class in which it was defined. Make sense? So again, we just went through that process and we still have no idea what these things are. Okay. We don't know, well, we know what they are, we don't know what they do. Okay, but we've identified them in the wild. All right. If we're out there on a safari and we see a lion, we don't know if it's a nice lion or a mean lion, but we know it's a lion. We don't know if he's going to eat us or if he's going to, sit there and roll over and want us to scratch its belly like you see in all the document. Don't do that in the wild. The safari people yell at you. It's like, how do you know that? Trust me, the safari people will yell at you. Don't pet the. There's some video I saw not that long ago with I think there was like at Yosemite National Park here in the States, and it was there's these giant bears there, right? And the bears look all nice, cute, and cuddly. They are really dangerous animals, bears. Okay, but they look all nice and friendly, and they're playing around. And so these people get out of the car and start trying to feed the bears. Okay, well now all of a sudden the bears associate, people, free food. Let's go and see if they have more free food. So these people get back in their car. These bears start flipping their car over. It's like shaking the M&M jar, right? Awesome. The people inside are screaming, but you got the one kid in the backseat who's videoing the whole thing.
Wait, they actually was doing that?
Oh yeah. Well, that's how people are now, right? We were already in this bad situation. We might as well catch it on camera. Let me look. Well, you're still catching it. Somebody's going to find your camera. Okay, I'm not saying you'd rather, have this, would have had for the situation to have occurred, but you're already in it. The situation has begun. We're already that ship has sailed, so to speak. So let's get some footage. Is the punchline. All right. So let's talk about what this guy is doing. All right, so we have something called find view by ID. This guy is an instance method of the, I'm just going to generically call it the activity class, even though it's technically called the app compat activity, but I'm just going to call it the activity class. An instance method of the activity class that allows an activity to search for a particular view in its interface by the view's unique identifier. Okay? That's what that dude does. And I'll just start the slide for the other one since we're out of time. What is the R class? All right, so we'll start there next time. All right, so again, I think I asked you to do this last time, but between now and next class, I want everybody to do whatever it takes with their Android Studio. Make sure you do the updates, make sure you reinstall, whatever it is, so that you have a Hello World program running inside of a emulator like this. All right, so you should be able to create a new project, let it do all of its Gradle cooking, all that stuff, hit play, create your virtual device, and then have it show up on the screen. That will put you in the position where we'll be able to do your homework when we start assigning it. Sound good? All right, remember today, faculty, student, staff, Bible study, God, and grub, go to the cafeteria, sign in, get a free lunch, take it down to the terrace room. And I will see everybody on Thursday.